Ladies and gentlemen, John Canzano joins us right now. JohnCanzano.com. All brought to you by Zeke's Pizzas. We make the transition to college football. Best selection of pizzas of local Northwest craft beers. Visit Zeke'sPizza.com. Follow John on Twitter, John Canzano BFT. Read his work at JohnCanzano.com. Listen to the radio show, The Bald-Faced Truth in Portland, Oregon, 750 The Game. How are you, sir?
Everything good? I'm doing well. How you doing, man? I feel like I need a walk-up song since I'm coming out of the bullpen. Is that right?
Yeah, you do need a walk. What would your walk-up song be?
I don't know. I'm not like a big hard rock guy, but I feel like that sets mood. Like if you're, coming into AC/DC and you're coming out of the bullpen, the crowd gets into that. So I'd go with something like that, probably.
Yeah, that's good. You got to have something. You got to come up with something.
All right.
I want to start with this. You had him on your show last week, John Mateer.
Yeah.
And he's an engaging young man. He's an easy conversation. He's a very good quarterback. You got Jake Dicker coming out yesterday telling the press, listen, he's the best quarterback on the West Coast. I'm curious. There is going to be, and it's already started, a bidding war to try to get him in the portal. And no doubt it's probably already started. He's being contacted, I would assume. I don't know if he has an agent or what, or someone that's working with him. What is the price tag for someone like John Mateer in the portal?
Yeah, it's interesting because when the portal first started, remember Cam Ward was one of those first guys that came to Washington State, and I put the first number. I was trying to get a number on what does a quarterback cost, and that's when the portal first opened. He was coming from Incarnate Word to Pullman, Washington. And Cam Ward got $90,000. The package was a $90,000 package. It was a truck. It was some walking around money. It was the use of an apartment. It was some airline tickets for his parents. Wow. We've now seen that escalate where, guys are getting $1 million, now $2 million. You sort of look at Dylan Gabriel's package at Oregon. I saw a number out there at $2 million. So I would have to think John Mateer is $1 million guy, right? $750,000 to $1 million guy. And so if you're Washington State and you're Jake Dicker, you either have to come up with that money or you have to come up with the sales pitch to Mateer and enough money that makes him believe that he is, better off staying right there in Pullman where he is featured and they understand him and they believed in him when maybe some others did not. But that's the reality of this world today. And I'm curious to see how this revenue sharing thing is going to go over when you've got, a roster that is going to be about a $20 to $23 million roster in the top schools. How is that money going to be allocated? I think we can gather some of that intel by looking at the NFL rosters, and the quarterbacks are getting paid. It's going to be quarterbacks. It's going to be pass rushers and defensive tackles, and then cover corners and, then the rest of the guys.
Package deal. I mean, I heard someone on social media saying, what if Mateer and Arbuckle were a package deal? I would take it a step further. What if it were Mateer and Dicker?
Yeah, I think those things are scary for Washington State and they're realities in this world. Now, I will say this. I don't think the coaching carousel is going to deliver us as many openings as we see in other years. I think that a lot of the schools, I'm talking to ADs who are saying they're going to play it close to the vest. They expect the other schools to do the same thing because there's so much uncertainty with how you're going to allocate scholarships. How are you going to pay for all this stuff in the new world? The last thing you want to be doing is having, a buyout for a coach you've just fired sitting on your books. And it's why I'm kind of looking at Lincoln Riley at USC and I'm going, does he get a little benefit of the doubt if he doesn't end up, segueing to your last segment with the Chicago Bears or somewhere like that? Does USC have a little more patience with Lincoln Riley because hey, they know they're going to be revenue sharing soon. That's $88 million that they don't have. So I kind of think that the jobs will be more limited. But yeah, Arbuckle and Mateer or Dickert and Mateer become kind of scary realities for Washington State right now.
You talked to him, like as I mentioned before, you talked to him last week. You get a sense that he would leave, that he would hit the portal?
I don't know. I think I stopped trying to guess what 19, 20, 21-year-old kids are thinking a long time ago. I have one of those in my own household. Look, this stuff blows in the wind sometimes, but you have to figure out what that kid's love language is. He was a high school baseball player. He seems to have roots in Texas, right? So I think it's, Texas A&M calls. I think you could be in some trouble. But I did sense some loyalty from him. And Washington State was a school that bet on him. And now has handed him the keys very young, and he's having the kind of success that people are noticing. The problem is if you go 11-1 and you don't make the playoff, you know what those other coaches are going to be telling John Mateer, hey, you're not getting seen. You can't get in the playoff there. Why are you staying there another year? So I think it becomes more and more important tonight when these rankings come out again that Washington State takes some steps forward in that ranking that, sort of alleviates a little bit of that. But, the collective's got to get its act together. And I think Oregon State showed this, all the players they lost and Damian Martinez, you have to be super proactive as a collective and as a school. You've got to go after Jake Dickert now. You've got to go after Mateer now, and you've got to sell those guys now on what they can get.
Can these collectives afford something like that?
I don't know. That's the question. And the retention piece at Washington State is, I think, one of the great stories of this season.
Yeah.
Aside from Cam Ward, what Jake Dickert did was remarkable. I mean, he kept guys there when you wouldn't have expected it. Like, he had no conference. They had an idea of where they wanted to play. They didn't have a conference championship available to them. They didn't have a TV deal, and he kept that together. And so I don't know. There's something to what Jake Dickert's selling internally that's working. So I think you have to lean into that if you're Washington State, and that collective has got to say, all right, go out to the donors. And, are there donors out there that want to keep it together? I have talked to Washington State donors who are texting me saying, we need to move now. So I think there's some motivation and some understanding in the fan base. And these are big donors. There's some understanding there that they have to be proactive, and there's going to be an expense to this if they want to keep it together.
Here's what give him a wheat farm out in the Palouse, and he gets to keep all the profits. Just give him.
Why not?
The Mateer wheat farm. He's got a barbecue deal with Miss Huddy's. Isn't that enough? That would be enough for me.
It's enough for you and I. But here, there a lot of these collectives too are doing deals where, you get vested as the quarters come along, and I could see a deal. He gets 10 acres in the first quarter, and then 10 more. You got to tier it for him, keep him around. It's the mistake Oregon State made, I think, with Damian Martinez. It was a $400,000 deal. They gave him $100,000 a quarter. Yeah. In spring, he said, "I'm staying." Of course, he was staying to pick up the check, Puck. Like it was $100,000 there. As soon as he got the check, he was out to Miami.
Yeah. Yeah. What did you make of, if maybe people didn't see it, Trent Bray's comments? He's the head coach at Oregon State, and he was pressed on it this week. What is it going to cost? What's it cost you to field the team? And he's like, finally at the end, he's like, millions. Where are they at right now? Is Oregon State teetering on, I don't want a collapse, but where are they at with their collective and roster retention?
Well, I asked Rick Neuheisel this question because I had a chance to talk with him. And I said, look, let's look at Jedd Fisch at Washington, Brent Brennan at Arizona, and Trent Bray at Oregon State, all first-year coaches. And Neuheisel immediately went to the fact that, like, Washington has got resources. They will figure it out. They'll find out. Jedd's going to be okay. He's got proof of performance. At Arizona, he's still in a Power 4 conference. So Bray has the disadvantage of not only being a first-year head coach, but he's the only one in America that didn't have a conference to belong to and had the uncertainty swirling and lost so much of his roster for players who jumped to other schools, including USC and LSU and others. Like, he lost good players to Miami. And so all of a sudden, you see the cupboard's bare. Anytime he has an injury, it's a huge drop-off. He's playing players that should not be on the field. And in the collective, I reached out during the game the other day to Kyle Bornstead, who is the co-founder of the Damnation Collective. And I said, all right, give me an idea of where you are. And he said, we feel good. We feel like the fan base understands the mission. But the problem that you have at Oregon State that doesn't exist at Washington State is you don't have proof of performance to get people excited. And we know damn well what makes people open the checkbook. It's wins. It's the idea that, okay, we're a 10-win team. How much better could we be if I give a little more? But when you are a 4-win, 5-win, trying to get to a 6-win situation like Trent Bray's in, you don't have that proof of performance to sell. And I think it's really difficult to ask those fans, hey, give more, open your pocketbook. We've got a schedule for 2025. They know where they're going to be in 2026. But that is a high wire act and high wins for Trent Bray. And Bray, I'm not sure like he's got the personality to be this great recruiter. So he needs that collective. He's going to need to be armed with some money and some proof of performance, because I don't think he can walk into the living room like Dan Lanning or even Jake Dickert, who's selling the slow cooking in the crock pot. Like Trent Bray can't do that. He doesn't have that. He's a really good defensive coordinator and a good coach. He's figuring out how to be a head coach.
It always felt like that was a hire at a necessity because of where they were at, because of the landscape of the sport, that he's a good coordinator, but maybe he's not going to be the guy. Now, again, that's just an early jump to a conclusion, and there's still this season to play out, and we'll see what he can do next season. You brought up the NIL, and I brought this up last week on the podcast I do with Jordan Reffin and Elise Woodward, and you'll love the name. It's called Puck the Huskies. It's just great. It's really good, and I like saying it every time to them. Just to get, because I know it gets under their skin. But I asked Jordan this, and he seemed to agree a little bit. Why isn't Washington's NIL bigger? I mean, they are one of, I don't know, you tell, how many universities are inside a city? And then a city that's top 12 media market, and then a city that has this much wealth in it. With the tech industry and all that, you would think that they would have one of the best NILs, the Motley Futures, around with all these Fortune 500 companies. But Jordan says, no, it's not really the case. It's not really the deal. Why?
I think it if you look at sort of the rise of the NIL transfer era and you put it on a chart, like a timeline, you said, okay, here's when NIL was introduced. And you line that up with the turnover that Washington had at the head coaching position, going from a huge letdown when Chris Peterson left into Jimmy Lake, which was not what fans signed up for, into hiring an underwhelming hire at first in Kalen DeBoer, but was sneaky good by Jen Cohen, who ends up having this magical season. I think they were just ready, Puck, to cash in on the NIL front if DeBoer sticks around, because they had shown how close you could get. We were right there. They're going to the Big Ten. They know they're going to need to spend there. And what happens? DeBoer leaves. I know a lot of Husky fans. I have friends who are Husky fans who just were like, I'm done. And they sounded like Oregon State and Washington State fans, oddly, because they emotionally had ridden this roller coaster to the point where they were booking tickets to Houston, seeing this team play, thinking about what it could be, and it ended. It ended really before, the fourth quarter ended and Michael Penix was gone, and then Kalen DeBoer was gone. And so I think they should have been cashing in there. I also think the whole AD mess, going from Jen Cohen to Dannon, how do you as an athletic department keep that congruency of vision when you go from Chris Peterson to Jimmy Lake to Kalen DeBoer to DeBoer's gone, now you're hiring Fisch, your AD's leaving. I think the NIL piece is lost in there somewhere, and I think that hurt Washington.
Some burnout maybe from fans and alumni.
Sure.
Just burnout. But I guess I'm just getting to like the Boeings of the world and Amazon and Microsoft and Weyerhaeuser. I mean, they are some massive companies in this city, and I just don't. I just don't see it. I just would think it, because they have built that up as, and even Fisch in his introductory press conference talked about all these companies. He paraded Steve Ballmer around, early practices, and to my knowledge, and maybe I'm incorrect. Somebody maybe at Motley Futures would correct me, but it doesn't seem like they're having that much of an impact at a school like that with a rich football tradition, a large alumni base, and then sitting in this just unbelievable financial fertile ground that most of these campuses across, Oregon doesn't have that. Eugene's not that. Tuscaloosa's not that. It's just weird. It's just weird why it's not a bigger deal.
Well, and I think, look, in Oregon's case, Oregon punches above its weight because of Phil Knight.
Right.
And Washington's punching under its weight when you look at the corporate sponsorships and the ability there. And I'm not sure Jedd Fisch is the guy to come in and get those Fortune 500 companies all fired up. I mean, they're probably looking at Fisch and going, okay, how long is he going to be here? And so is the rank and file fan who would just be giving $50 or $100 a month because they want to be part of it.
Right.
I look at Kenny Dillingham at Arizona State. He's done a fantastic job riling everybody up, but he's got this relentless enthusiasm and he's got people in the fold. I'm really curious too at Oregon. Rob Mullins, the athletic director at Oregon, sends this email out last Friday where he basically is saying, hey, there's all these new costs. This isn't stuff that we're built for. And it's just weird to hear Oregon talking like that, right? And I kind of wonder if the Duck fans will open their wallets, because I think all along the typical Duck fan has gone, Phil's got it, right? He's good for it. We don't need to give. It was really odd to hear the athletic director at Oregon sort of going, hey, we might be in some trouble too, and we're going to need you. To the rank and file, 50,000 people they sent that email out to. I think it was probably a little jarring, and I'm curious to see if that will result in people giving willingly, or are the Ducks going to do what Tennessee is doing and saying, hey, we're going to add 10% to the tickets? I kind of expect that's the direction, because I think most Duck fans are going to go, Phil's got it.
I'm going to stick. Hold on. I'm going to get back to. Remind me to get back to Dan Lanning. I have a Dan Lanning question for you, but I want to get to what was the biggest story in the old conference, but one of the biggest stories in college football. You got Mark Harlan, the Utah's AD, running on the field, yelling at officials, then goes and does a press conference and says that game was stolen from us. Now we got everybody with the Zapruder film, coming out, showing like all different angles of the hold there on the Utah defensive back. You were there. You covered it. That is one of, looking from the outside in, it appears to be one of the best rivalries in college football. Two rabid fan bases. Utah and BYU have always supported their football teams. I mean, it's so much that, the uniforms just worked. All red, all blue. It was perfect. What was it like there? What was the scene like afterwards? And then when were you made aware that Harlan had gone to the press conference and gone to the podium and said what he said?
Well, look, I went there because I was like, hey, a lot of rivalries, including the Apple Cup and Civil War, have been hurt by realignment. Even though they're playing the game, it's not the same in week 3. It didn't have the same impact and feel. People who are at the games and the stadiums know what I'm talking about. This realignment thing has killed some tradition. It's killed rivalries. It broke up a 108-year-old conference. But if you look at BYU and Utah, that's a rivalry that is getting an assist from realignment, right? They're in the same conference now. They're going to play. I don't like where it fell on the schedule. It should have been later in the year. I don't like that it was an 8:15 start, but I went to Salt Lake City because I was like, I need to see what this thing's about. I've never seen it, only watched it on TV. And I can tell you, these fan bases are rabid. Like the Utah fan base, even without BYU involved, they were expanding their stadium 5-6 years ago when everybody else was contracting, right? And saying, oh, we're having attendance problems. Utah had a 5,000 season ticket wait list. And so the Utah fans are going to show up. The BYU fans traveled. It was amazing to see that spectacle and the energy in the building. Then Utah comes out and plays way over its head, playing its best game of the season. I think Utah had that game won. I think anybody who saw that knows that official was looking, like Rick Neuheisel said, he said, you have to be looking for that holding to call that holding, because it happened so fast. Quarterback got buried. The play was over. Utah was celebrating. There were 2 snaps in a row that had really weird, controversial things that both went against Utah. BYU goes down, kicks a field goal, wins the game. And, the Utah players were just distraught. Now, I'm there because I want to see this. I'm obviously writing a column. So, I'm paying attention to Kyle Whittingham in the post-game news conference waiting. And here comes Mark Harlan, the athletic director, and I've never seen this, steps onto the podium and just blisters the Big 12, the officials, the professionalism of the officials. And I loved it from a couple of standpoints. One, it was authentic. You could tell Harlan was really upset. And then his coach, Kyle Whittingham, comes in and he kind of knocks the chair over at the end of his statement.
That was the best.
I'm not going to talk about this, but then proceeds to talk about it. And it was just this great moment where how much this game means to both sides. You have to give credit to BYU, who just kept playing and playing and playing and found a way. But I was looking at Utah, and I felt really bad for the Utes because I think they got robbed. There's a clear conflict of interest when you have a Big 12 officiating crew working a Big 12 game. It's got an undefeated Big 12 team playing in it. Everybody's going, are they going to get leapfrogged by Boise State if they lose a game? And so I think there's a real conflict of interest there that creates more perception maybe than reality. But it was an unfortunate situation. And Neuheisel's idea is to centralize the officiating, take it away from the conferences, remove this pressure for the Big 12 officials to kind of call it the BYU's way in the end of the game. Just get that out of there, get it out of the ACC, get it out of everywhere, and centralize the officiating. But man, I turned to Bill Riley, who's like the voice of Utah sports at the end of a game as I'm leading the building. And I'm like, are they all like this? Is this every Holy War? Like, it was just a circus.
Do you think Brett Yormark had a conversation with them before the game?
No, but I think, look, I've talked to officials and they're well aware of the stakes, just like the NBA officials. They're well aware of the stakes and what's going on in the game. And I kind of wondered, like, my perception was that it was not a penalty. I watched it 6-7 times on replay. I saw it live. I was confused by it because the quarterback was immediately sacked. It should have been no call or pick the flag up once the official talks to his other officials and say, hey, man, he was never getting that pass off. But it was a little handsy, but it wasn't a hold in my view. But I do think the officials are going into that situation knowing that that's an undefeated BYU team and that the conference has not just $6 million at stake for making the playoff, but an additional $6 million if they get a bye. There's a $12 million payoff that comes from BYU going undefeated, Puck. And so I don't know how the officials are calling that game without thinking, I need to give BYU every fair shake I can give them, every benefit of the doubt here, because they're about to lose to a 4-4 Utah team that is going to spoil their season. And gosh, just give them a fair shake becomes like Rick Neuheisel's comment. He said, you have to be looking for that call to throw that flag. And so I do think that side judge or back judge or whoever threw that flag was looking for the call, going, okay, I need to watch for defensive holding here, because you don't throw that penalty unless you're looking for it.
All I thought about for Brett Yormark was, his relationship or his dancing with the World Wrestling Federation, where he wanted to bring them all under. And that's what I thought of. Like, that was a Vince McMahon move. We're going to decide the outcome before the game is over, so we can ensure that we at least have one team that represents us. Now, then the Harlan, he goes off about it was stolen from us. Hey, we were excited about coming to and I'm watching this, and he's like, we were excited about coming to the Big 12, not so much excited anymore. And I'm like, hey, if I had Teresa Gould's phone number, hey, Teresa, let's call him now. You never know. Explain to people, we've gone over this many times, but they don't have an exit fee in the Big 12. If they want to leave, they could leave.
Yes.
Do you think there's ever a chance that they could come back, or do they leave that open because they want to go someplace else?
I think they want to go to the Big 10. I think that was the design of it. Now, while they don't have an exit fee, they do have a grant of rights that gets them $30 million a year in media rights money. And so, there's a penalty for giving that up that isn't cheap. You talk about, going to the Pac-12 and getting best case scenario, 10 or 12 million, right? Like pipe dream scenario. So there's a stiff penalty to that, but it does leave the door open. And I was talking to several other writers at Rice-Eccles Stadium on Saturday night, and we were debating whether Oregon State and Washington State have it better. Think about this. Oregon State, Washington State, Boise State. Just think of those three. Think about the next 5 years and the access to the playoff that they're going to have, where
100%.
You win your conference championship, you're going to the playoff. And the conference is now going to get $6 million if you make the first round, another $6 million if you go to the quarterfinal. There's a chance there at $18 or $20 million for advancing into the playoff. But I think that we're going to see, much like in basketball, where schools will say, we went to the Final Four, and they celebrate that. I think you're going to see it with this playoff. We made the playoff will become a banner inside your stadium. Playoff appearances by Washington State, 3 or 4. But if you're Washington State, Oregon State, Boise State, you've got better access to the playoff than half of the Big 12, 3/4 of the Big 10, 3/4 of the SEC. You start thinking about, just from that standpoint, not from the media rights money, not from sustainability long-term, but just for access to the playoff, you're living a better life maybe being in the Pac-12. And so does that become appealing to somebody at some point? And can you start to piecemeal together a better media rights package if you're the Pac-12 by picking off Big 12 or ACC schools that are looking over and going, you know what? We can go to the playoff there. We have no shot in our conference.
Yeah. No, it's a great point. I mean, and I 100% agree. It is, again, the money's not there, as you said, to compare to those other conferences, but the access to the playoff, they are in a way better situation than all those other schools. They just are, and hopefully it pans out for them. And because of who they'll play, they'll always have a somewhat easier path to get there. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see what some of these other schools would do as they look at what the rankings are coming out later today. Where do you think Washington State is? Roughly the same.
I think they might tick up just a touch. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. Whatever happens to Boise State, I think will happen to Washington State. So if Boise State jumps maybe to 10 or 11 from 12, I would expect Washington State to take a similar leap. But if the committee is really going to penalize these schools and say, oh, they're not playing the great schedule, which I think is not the right way to judge these schools. I think you have to judge who's the better team if you're ranking them. But if you're going to really penalize these schools for the schedule that they're playing, particularly in Washington State's case, where everybody in that committee room knows they were abandoned, they had no choice. This is the schedule that was available to them. I think that you've got no shot of getting into the top 12, but I'm still going to put it, Puck, at, look at the carnage that we saw just this last week.
Sure.
I'll still put it at 10, 12% that Washington State could creep up there. And again, it's mission accomplished tonight for Jake Dickert, as this committee is going to be talking about Washington State for the second straight week. You have to keep that narrative going. That is worth its weight in gold.
We need Harlan and the Utes to knock off CU this week. We need ASU to probably finish off Kansas State, unless Kansas State's already finished off, but I guess they're kind of already finished off anyways. And then that Boise State, you got to root for Boise State, but that Boise State-San Jose State game is going to be a sneaky great game, man.
Yeah.
Because San Jose State's fun, and they're good.
Yeah.
That offense is legit. They can move the football.
Yeah, and I don't think that, look, I get it. Like, you look at some of the Mountain West schools and you go, okay, the Wyoming, New Mexico, sure. San Diego State's not having a great year. But, you'd look at the top teams in that conference and you look at Boise State. Boise State went to Eugene and gave Oregon everything it could handle. Ashton Genty had 190 yards. They pushed Oregon to the final play of the game. Boise left the stadium thinking they were the better team and should have won the game. And Oregon's the number one team in America. Now, is a good loss make up for the fact that you're not playing great competition down the stretch? We will find out. But I think you cannot forget what happened at Autzen Stadium if you're the committee.
You know who could use a John Mateer, as I think about it? Especially if Genty were to stay. He's a junior, right?
Genty's not staying. Come on.
Well, let's say he did.
Okay, let's say.
Mateer at Boise. Oh.
Yeah.
Well, that quarterback's not good. That's the only thing that holds them back.
Yeah, and I think Boise is one of those programs that getting to the playoff is enough for them. And if they could be the 4 seed, if they somehow can leapfrog the ACC or the Big 12 and be the 4 seed, I think they can win a game. But
they're going to be a problem in this new conference, though. I mean, they just got, what was it, 2 weeks ago? They got a $25 million gift.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to be a problem. Like, Oregon State and Washington State better watch out.
But look, why we're ripping Washington for not having the sponsorships and the money's not there. Like, isn't the lesson here that if you win and you can be very focused in your footprint and get your donors riled up, they will open up their wallets, and it doesn't matter. It's the same logic like that Apple TV deal for the Pac-12. That the penetration in Pullman and Corvallis and all these markets where you had rabid fans would have been fine. So are there NIL dollars there that can walk hand in hand with that? We will find out.
If you were Jedd Fisch, would you continue to play Will Rogers, or would you go to Damon Williams?
I'd go young. I'd move on. I didn't see it in the Apple Cup. At the Apple Cup, I was like, that's the best they got. So I don't have it. The offensive line's not good. They can't move anybody around. That's been evident in any game where they get a physical test. But this Penn State game, they were just so overmatched with the line of scrimmage. Does it matter? So yeah, down the stretch here, it'll be interesting. I think they have one game that they have a real good shot in, and the other two are tougher. But they're not beating Oregon. So here you go. If you're Washington, go get this game. And I'd go with the future right now.
Do you think NIL plays a part into it? Because they committed money to him, whatever. I mean, if you tell me a good quarterback getting $1 million, I'm going to assume Will Rogers got $1 million.
Yeah, and I do know the boosters are paying attention to this. They feel vested. They feel like, hey, I was responsible for helping bring this player to this school. Now, Oregon's different because I think you've got one guy walking around who's going, I brought them all here. But I think at some of these other places, you've got a guy sitting on the 50-yard line in row 10 or in a suite who's saying, why did I give if my guy's on the sideline? So I think absolutely it complicates the rotation.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't understand the obsession of becoming bowl eligible. Sure, fine. You get more practices. You're going to go to the Independence Bowl. It's in Shreveport, Louisiana.
I'd rather be recruiting. I'd rather be out recruiting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if the extra practices really warrant being in Shreveport when it's like 50 degrees and you're playing somebody terrible. I'm with you. I would go with Damon Williams. Okay, I promise you, and I know I've kept you long. Just from a journalistic standpoint, okay? I'm curious about the line of questioning that Dan Lanning went through this week. There was a report. You know where I'm going with this?
Go.
There was a reporter that tried to pin him down. And listen, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm about as liberal as there is, okay? And I think a lot of people know that. I don't go into politics a lot, but I'm liberal, real liberal. For people that don't know, there was a reporter there on Monday, I would assume, that tried to get Dan Lanning to react to the election. And he wanted Dan Lanning to say, I disagree with the election. That's what the reporter was trying to get. And my question is, what are we doing?
I know.
What are we trying to accomplish with that question?
I'm a big fan of the news conference being a news conference, but when it turns into an agenda conference or, let me take it otherwise mundane Monday. I feel like this on my own show. There are sometimes you can't avoid talking about politics because it bleeds into sports in ways that never did before. But I know that people are coming to my show. They're not coming to my show to find out what I think about the election or who I voted for and where I stand on this issue or that issue. They're coming to the show to escape a little bit. And I'm not saying that I need to stick to sports because sometimes you don't stick to sports. But bringing that into the news conference, I mean, what else was in the bag? I don't care what Dan Lanning's views are on healthcare and the economy and how he voted. I want to know if his kids are ready to play and why they were sluggish against Maryland. I want to know, does he have good guys on this team? I want to know can he beat Ohio State in a rematch? I want to know how he's managing the roster for the rest of the season. There's so many other things that are on my mind as they go off to Wisconsin for the first time in his career. So much more there. You're fishing. It's too much fishing.
Yeah, and it was just the way, and I thought he handled it perfectly. I really do. I thought Lanning did a good job of just because he knew what was going on, because it was a long rambling question, and then he just answered it. I thought perfectly. Last before you leave,
and by the way, long rambling questions. Can we just get a moratorium on that? I don't care if you're a reporter. I don't care how much you know. I don't care if you know 12 formation, 13 personnel. I don't need to know that you don't need to qualify yourself as an expert in the news conference in the run up to your question. Just ask the question.
Just ask it. I'm so tired of these football reporters. You see it in the NFL too. The all 22 is showing me. Was that a quarter coverage there? Were you in a Tampa 2? First of all, dipstick, ask. You don't even know what it is. Stop pretending like you know what it is. Just ask, why was the pass coverage not good this week? That's it. Yeah. Just sort of,
or ask the coach, help me understand this, or help readers or listeners or viewers understand.
Well, about the will linebacker,
what you're doing here. Yeah.
Brian Wheeler passing away last week. I talked about it yesterday. I mean, it was before you and I had known each other. When did you get to Portland, by the way?
2002.
Okay, so almost we were about a year apart. A couple years apart. And I remember getting there, working and covering the Blazers early on. And I start talking to him. He couldn't be nicer. He put his arm around me. He helped me as a young 23-year-old broadcaster. He ended up taking me to Vegas to go call summer league games and would always listen to tapes. And he was just the kindest soul. I mean, he had a troubled soul too, but he was so kind, and he was such a damn good broadcaster.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I think back, and I didn't know when I moved there. I didn't know. I mean, a little bit. I didn't know the love affair of the city with Bill Schonely and the Blazers. Right. Got to know it certainly when I moved there and was working there. But it certainly at seeing what it's like here in Seattle with great broadcasters that we've had. And I think back about, he walked into a situation where he replaced a legend.
Yeah.
And he became a legend himself. I mean, John, you don't ever see that. And he was, it was just sad that he passed. He was a great man.
Yeah, and for Seattle people, that Bill Schonely and Brian Wheeler, there's just some crossover there in the markets, and Kevin Calabro now calling Blazer games. And, it's Portland didn't want to like Brian Wheeler. Bill Schonely got unceremoniously pushed out of the job. He was the original broadcaster. He was not done. And it would be like shoving Vin Scully to the side and bringing in a new broadcaster. It was just such a tone-deaf move. And here came Brian Wheeler, who's breaking the cardinal rule in broadcasting. He's replacing the guy, and he made it his own thing. And you're right. He was kind to everybody. I talked to so many people who said he was the kindest person. He was a gentle soul. And yes, he battled weight. For people who don't know, Brian, for his entire life, he battled weight. He appeared at one point 10 or 12 years ago to have it under control. Didn't. I know in the last couple of years, he was hospitalized. I texted with him, at the beginning of the NBA season. He was hospitalized and his health was deteriorating and it was not trending in a positive direction. And, I sat on press row in the seat that was in front of where Brian Wheeler was doing his broadcast. I got to hear him over my shoulder, not on radio, but just kind of broadcasting the game like he was whispering it in my ear. He was phenomenally talented. Probably the best radio NBA play-by-play broadcaster of that era. He was good. And he would have gone on to do, I think, some amazing things nationally had he not been held back by his health problems and his weight. But I always wondered, Puck, I would talk to other media members and say, are we going to have to do CPR? Like, is he going to have a moment? He would get really worked up during the game. And it was sad because I think everybody, even a decade ago, knew it was trending in a bad direction. And a lot of people tried to help him. And again, it's one of those cases too, where I look and I go, he's too young to go like that, and too talented and such a nice person. And I want to remember him that way. And I also want people that are battling a health issue to go, hey, you got to get on this. Like, you've got to, if you need to drop 10, drop 10. If you need to drop 20, drop 20. I know that there's often a lot more to it than just saying, go drop the weight. But, another cautionary tale and a guy gone too soon. Yeah.
Well said. And you talk about in your mailbag of this week at johncanzano.com. We do have some breaking news.
Yeah, do it.
USC has violated NCAA rules by having 8 football analysts engage in on and off the field coaching activities in 2022 and the spring of 2023. The football program has been placed on probation for 1 year, plus a $50,000 fine. Lincoln Riley also determined to have violated NCAA head coach responsibilities, but will not be suspended. Does this open up now a door for his contract where she can get out of it?
Maybe. They're a private school, right? And that's part of the problem with USC is nobody has that contract, but it might. There are some coaching contracts there where there's a standard conduct clause that says, hey, if you violate NCAA rules or you break rules, you don't follow rules, you are subject to termination. I'd like to see more of that. The first thing I heard, like when you started to talk about it, you were like 2 or 3 words into it. I went, there's her opening. Because if you're Jen Cohen, this isn't your guy. Carolyn Folt, the president at USC that helped blow up the Pac-12, is leaving. So Lincoln Riley's got to be looking around going, there's nobody here who was here when I was hired, not that many years ago, hired in that cycle just a few years ago. So, he could be in some trouble, and he may want out. Like, he's struggling to the point where, like, you're looking at the end of this season and you look at NCAA problems on top of that. He may be saying, hey, I'd be better off as the offensive coordinator in Chicago.
Yeah. Kept you too long. Thanks, John. John Canzano. You can read all of his work up at johncanzano.com. What do you got cooking up there right now that you want to promote?
Well, look, I'm working on, obviously we just interviewed Rick Neuheisel. I've got something to say about that, but Monday mailbag's out. I've got some Pac-12 stuff coming probably tomorrow. I'm taking a big look at kind of what direction are they going with the media rights? Who might be the next edition? So you can find that all there. Get a free subscription or a paid subscription, whatever works for you, works for me.
Okay. And his weekly visit, John Canzano. Again, johncanzano.com, brought to you by Zeke's Pizza. Visit Zeke'sPizza.com for the best in local Northwest craft beers and best selection of pizzas. Follow John on Twitter, John Canzano BFT. Again, his work at johncanzano.com. And the radio show, The Bald-Faced Truth, 7:50 The Game. They're in Portland, Oregon. And, of course, if you just came in this late and missed it, up on YouTube, please subscribe there. Also, check it out on all the podcast platforms, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. And, of course, one-stop shop, pucksports.com. All right, John, we'll talk to you next week. Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy.